The monthly family dinner at Mom's house had always been a delicate balance of unspoken tensions and forced pleasantries, but tonight's gathering carried an electric undercurrent that made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way my sister Jessica strutted through the front door 23 minutes late, her designer Hermes bag swinging from her manicured shoulder like a battle flag, or how she immediately commandeered the conversation with breathless tales of her absolutely life-changing Vegas experience, without bothering to acknowledge anyone else's existence. I'd been sitting quietly at the familiar dining room table, mechanically working through Mom's overcooked pot roast while listening to the usual family dynamics play out around me. Dad dominated discussions about his golf handicap improvements. Uncle Mike regaled everyone with stories from his construction business that nobody particularly wanted to hear. Mom fussed over every minor detail of the meal preparation like she was hosting foreign dignitaries instead of the same relatives who gathered here every third Sunday of the month. "You literally cannot imagine the suite they gave me," Jessica announced, sliding into her usual chair directly across from me with theatrical flair. Top floor of the Bellagio, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the fountain's 24-hour champagne service, Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. It was absolutely divine. Mom's face transformed into that particular expression of maternal pride she reserved exclusively for Jessica's accomplishments, real or imagined. "My successful daughter deserves nothing but the finest things in life." I continued cutting my meat into precise, uniform pieces, saying nothing. At 29 years old, I developed an almost scientific understanding of family dinner dynamics. Silence was survival. Questions led to comparisons. Comparisons led to humiliation. Better to maintain my role as the invisible family member who occasionally contributed polite murmurs of agreement when directly addressed. Jessica was the golden child, the marketing manager with the impressive-sounding job title at a mid-tier advertising agency, the Instagram-perfect lifestyle carefully curated to project success and sophistication. She possessed that particular type of magnetic personality that commanded attention in every room she entered, the kind of effortless confidence that made people assume she must be important simply because she acted like she was. I was the other daughter. The boring government employee who lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Arlington and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door from a grocery store parking lot incident I'd never bothered to repair. My wardrobe consisted entirely of conservative business attire purchased from department store clearance racks. My social media presence was non-existent. My accomplishments, such as they were, remained largely invisible to my family because they'd never bothered to ask about the specifics of my work. "Jessica, tell them about the shopping expedition," Dad prompted eagerly, refilling her wine glass to the brim while my own sat conspicuously empty. The stories she was telling me earlier were incredible. Jessica's green eyes lit up with the fervor of someone about to deliver her favorite performance. "Oh my God, the shopping situation was absolutely insane. I spent something like $22,000 over 3 days. Completely new wardrobe from boutiques that don't even display prices because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. Custom jewelry from this designer who works exclusively with celebrities. Spa treatments that cost more per hour than some people make in a week." I felt like an actual celebrity the entire time. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. $22,000. On a marketing manager's salary that I knew from previous family conversations, topped out around $60,000 annually before taxes. The mathematics didn't compute, even accounting for credit card debt or savings depletion. "How exactly did you manage to afford all that?" I asked quietly, immediately regretting the question when every head at the table swiveled toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. The temporary silence felt heavy and uncomfortable. Jessica's laugh carried a sharp metallic edge that reminded me unpleasantly of fingernails on chalkboard. "Wouldn't you just love to know the details, little sister? Some of us have figured out how to actually live life instead of merely existing in beige monotony." Uncle Mike nodded with the sagely approval of someone who'd never met a platitude he couldn't embrace wholeheartedly. "Jessica's always had real ambition, real drive. Not like certain people who seem perfectly content with boring desk jobs that lead absolutely nowhere." The familiar sting of family disapproval washed over me like ice water. They'd never understood my career choice, never bothered to investigate what my boring government job actually entailed. They knew I worked for some branch of the Treasury Department, something that involved computers and extensive paperwork. They found it mind-numbingly dull, thoroughly unimpressive, certainly nothing that could compare to Jessica's dynamic marketing career with its client lunches and creative campaigns. Speaking of terminally boring careers, Jessica continued, clearly warming to her favorite theme. How's your little government paper-pushing situation progressing? Still shuffling forms around in some windowless office somewhere. It's going well, I responded automatically, falling back on the neutral responses I'd perfected over years of family gatherings. Well, she repeated with exaggerated incredulity. Jesus Christ, could you be any more pathetic? Don't you have any ambition whatsoever? Don't you want to accomplish something meaningful with your life instead of wasting away in bureaucratic obscurity? Mom immediately jumped into the conversation with her characteristic enthusiasm. Jessica just received another promotion opportunity. Senior Regional Marketing Director position. She'll be managing accounts worth millions of dollars and supervising a team of 12 creative professionals. Jessica preened under the attention like a peacock displaying its plumage. Meanwhile, certain people are apparently still struggling to make ends meet on entry-level government salaries at the advanced age of nearly 30. I wasn't quite 30 yet, but correcting Jessica's timeline would only invite more ridicule. I'd learned through painful experience that factual corrections were interpreted as defensive behavior, which encouraged further attacks. The real difference, Jessica continued, leaning forward conspiratorially like she was about to share state secrets, is that I've developed multiple income streams. Smart investment opportunities, cryptocurrency portfolios, strategic financial moves that your average government drone wouldn't possess the sophistication to understand or execute. She was lying. I could detect deception in her body language with the practiced eye of someone whose professional responsibilities included interrogating financial criminals. Jessica's eyes shifted slightly left when she fabricated stories, her voice pitched half an octave higher than normal. Her gestures became more animated to compensate for the lack of genuine conviction behind her words. But my family had never learned to read Jessica's tells. They absorbed her elaborate fictions with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for her childhood fairy tales. After dinner concluded, I dutifully helped Mom clear the dishes while Jessica held court in the living room, regaling everyone with increasingly elaborate Vegas anecdotes. Each story seemed to feature higher dollar amounts, more exclusive venues, more celebrity encounters that probably existed only in her imagination. As I loaded the dishwasher with mechanical efficiency, I noticed Jessica's oversized purse sitting open on the kitchen counter, positioned carelessly next to the coffee maker. Her leather wallet was clearly visible, stuffed thick with what appeared to be an unusual number of credit cards. Too many credit cards for any reasonable person to carry. I recognized several of them immediately. The distinctive blue Chase Sapphire Preferred card that I'd applied for 18 months ago specifically for its travel rewards program. The sleek silver Capital One Venture card with its unique geometric design pattern. The red Bank of America card that I kept exclusively for emergency situations. My stomach dropped as the terrible realization crystallized. Those were my credit cards. In Jessica's wallet. Being carried around like trophies. Find something particularly fascinating? Jessica's voice made me jump violently. She'd materialized in the kitchen doorway with the silent grace of a hunting cat, arms crossed defensively across her chest. Those are my credit cards, I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. Prove it, she replied with a smirk that contained absolutely no trace of shame or guilt. I could have provided immediate proof. I knew every account number by heart, could recite the 3-digit security codes from memory, had the monthly statements saved on my phone with detailed transaction histories. But I also understood with crystalline clarity that evidence wouldn't matter here, not with this audience, not in this house where Jessica's version of reality always took precedence over objective facts. Why? I asked instead, genuinely curious about her psychological reasoning. Jessica shrugged with practiced nonchalance. You never actually use them for anything interesting. They just sit there collecting dust while you live like some kind of financial monk who's afraid to spend money on anything beyond basic survival necessities. I figured I'd put them to productive use for once in their miserable existence. That's theft, I said simply. It's borrowing. From family. God, you're so fucking dramatic about everything. She grabbed her purse with deliberate casualness and sauntered back to the living room, where I could hear her launching into yet another fabricated tale about private gambling rooms and complimentary bottle service. I remained in the kitchen, hands trembling slightly as I retrieved my phone and accessed my banking applications. The financial damage exceeded my worst-case scenario projections. All 3 credit cards had been systematically maxed out with surgical precision. The Chase Sapphire Preferred, with its $15,000 limit, showed a current balance of $14,847. The Capital One Venture card reflected $9,923 against its $10,000 limit. The Bank of America emergency card had been pushed to its absolute maximum of $8,000. $32,770 in fraudulent charges. All originating from Las Vegas. All processed over the previous weekend. I walked back toward the living room on unsteady legs, my phone clutched in my sweating palm like a piece of incriminating evidence. Jessica was displaying photographs on her iPhone to an appreciative audience. Images of the luxury suite, shopping bags from boutiques I couldn't pronounce, herself posing with cocktails that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. "Jessica," I said quietly, interrupting her narrative about a private shopping experience with a personal stylist. "We need to discuss something important." "We're already discussing something," she replied without bothering to look up from her phone screen. "About the credit cards." The living room fell silent with the abrupt finality of a theater curtain dropping. Jessica finally raised her eyes to meet mine, her expression shifting from casual amusement to sharp-edged annoyance. "What about them? You stole them from my apartment. You committed credit card fraud. You need to immediately pay back every cent you spent." Jessica's laugh was harsh and ugly, devoid of any genuine humor. "Or what, exactly? You'll run crying to mommy? You'll call the big bad police?" I could feel the family's collective attention focusing on me with the intensity of stage lights, and their expressions told me everything I needed to know. Not concern about Jessica's criminal behavior, not sympathy for my position as a victim, but irritation that I was disrupting the evening's entertainment with my petty complaints. "Maybe you should have kept better track of your personal belongings," Dad said with the air of someone delivering Solomon-like wisdom. "This situation is partially your responsibility for being careless with important financial instruments." "She took them directly from my apartment," I said. "She used the emergency key I gave her 3 years ago when she was going through her divorce." "Family members help each other during difficult times," Mom added with the tone of someone explaining basic moral principles to a confused child. "Jessica will obviously reimburse you when her financial situation stabilizes." "With what money?" I asked. "She just spent $32,000 that she doesn't possess." Jessica stood up abruptly, her face flushed with wine and righteous indignation. "You want to know what your real problem is? You're pathologically jealous. You're consumed with bitter jealousy because I know how to embrace life while you just exist in your pathetic little gray world of rules and limitations." The room murmured collective agreement. Uncle Mike nodded with the gravity of someone who'd just witnessed profound truth being spoken. Aunt Linda made sympathetic clucking noises about the tremendous stress of Jessica's demanding career. $32,000, I repeated, as if the specific number might somehow penetrate their willful blindness. "I maxed out your cards in Vegas," Jessica laughed triumphantly, pulling the crumpled receipts from her purse and waving them above her head like battle flags. "What's a broke loser gonna do?" The family erupted in spontaneous applause. Dad raised his wine glass in an impromptu toast to Jessica's boldness. Mom clapped her hands together with genuine delight at her daughter's spirited defiance of conventional limitations. I looked around the room at these people who were theoretically bound to me by blood, who were supposed to love and protect me, who should have been outraged by what had been done to me. Instead, they were celebrating my victimization, cheering for the person who had robbed me, treating financial crimes like entertaining dinner conversation. I said calmly, "I'll file the report." The laughter continued unabated. They interpreted my statement as an empty threat, the desperate bluffing of someone who lacked any real power or authority. Jessica wiped tears of mirth from her carefully made-up eyes. "File whatever pathetic paperwork makes you feel better," she said dismissively. "Who's going to believe your sad little story? Who's going to care about some nobody government drone claiming her successful sister stole her credit cards?" I didn't respond to her taunts. I gathered my coat and purse, said goodbye to absolutely no one, and drove through the darkness back to my modest apartment in Arlington. Once there, I sat at my small kitchen table with my laptop computer and began composing a detailed report that would change everything. What my family didn't know, what they'd never bothered to inquire about despite 6 years of employment, was the precise nature of my boring government job. They understood that I worked for the Treasury Department in some capacity, but they'd never asked which specific division. They knew my daily routine involved extensive computer work, but they'd never questioned what exactly I was investigating. I was a senior criminal investigator for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, commonly known as FinCEN. For the past 6 years, I'd been tracking money laundering operations, bank fraud schemes, credit card fraud rings, and sophisticated financial crimes that crossed state and federal jurisdictional boundaries. My specialty was following digital money trails through complex international networks, identifying patterns that revealed criminal enterprises, and building prosecutable cases against financial criminals who thought they were untouchable. Jessica had just committed multiple federal felonies against a federal law enforcement officer whose specific expertise involved prosecuting exactly these types of crimes. The incident report took me nearly 3 hours to complete with the thoroughness it demanded. I documented every relevant detail: the theft of the physical credit cards from my apartment using Jessica's retained emergency key, the precise dates and amounts of each fraudulent transaction, the admissions of guilt she'd made in front of multiple witnesses, her refusal to provide restitution, her explicit acknowledgement that the charges were unauthorized. I attached comprehensive supporting documentation: screenshots of my banking records showing the fraudulent charges, photographs of the receipts she displayed as trophies, a detailed timeline of criminal activity, witness contact information for everyone who'd been present during her confessions. By Monday morning at 8:47 a.m., the case had been officially assigned to a specialized team of federal agents who handled financial crimes against federal employees. Not local police officers who might be persuaded to treat this as a family dispute. Not state investigators with limited resources. Federal agents with unlimited jurisdiction and the authority to make arrests anywhere in the United States. Jessica's Las Vegas spending spree had crossed multiple state lines, involved numerous financial institutions headquartered in different states, and violated several federal banking regulations simultaneously. The charges would include credit card fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft from a federal employee, and interstate transportation of stolen financial instruments. The investigation proceeded with the mechanical efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Jessica had been remarkably sloppy in her criminal methodology, leaving a paper trail that a first-year forensic student could follow. She'd used the stolen cards at dozens of Las Vegas establishments, always signing her own name instead of attempting to forge my signature, never making any effort to conceal her identity or disguise her activities. Her confidence in her own invulnerability had made her careless. My immediate supervisor, Deputy Director Martinez, called me Tuesday morning at 9:15 a.m. "This case is obviously personal," he said without preamble. It wasn't a question that required an answer. "It's also unambiguously criminal," I replied. "Do you want to recuse yourself from the investigation? Let another agent handle the prosecution." I considered the option for approximately 5 seconds. "No, sir. I can maintain complete professional objectivity. This situation is going to become extremely complicated when your family realizes who you actually are." He was absolutely correct. When the arrests happened, when the family finally understood that their boring government drone was actually a federal law enforcement officer with the authority to pursue felony prosecutions, the dynamics would shift dramatically. Wednesday afternoon at 2:33 p.m. my personal phone rang. Mom's contact photo appeared on the screen. "Honey, something absolutely terrible has happened to Jessica. Men in dark suits came to her office this morning. They arrested her in front of all her colleagues and clients. They mentioned bank fraud and federal charges. This has to be some kind of horrible mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said calmly. Extended silence. "Then, what do you mean it's not a mistake?" "I mean I filed a comprehensive report with the appropriate federal authorities regarding the theft of my credit cards and the subsequent fraudulent financial transactions." You actually called the police on your own sister?" "I contacted federal law enforcement regarding multiple felony crimes that were committed against me." "Federal law enforcement?" Mom's voice sounded faint and distant. "Sweetie, what exactly do you do at your job?" I'd been waiting 6 years for someone in my family to ask me that specific question. "I'm a senior criminal investigator for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, Mom. I investigate bank fraud, money laundering, credit card fraud schemes, and other financial crimes that fall under federal jurisdiction. What Jessica did to me represents a textbook case of interstate credit card fraud." The silence stretched so long I began to wonder if the call had been disconnected. You're actually a federal agent?" "I'm a federal criminal investigator with arrest authority. I've held this position for 6 years. But you always said you worked with computers and paperwork. You said your job was boring administrative work." "I investigate complex financial crimes using computer forensics and extensive documentation. I never described my work as boring. You and the rest of the family decided it was boring without ever asking for specific details. Another protracted silence punctuated by the sound of Mom's labored breathing. Can you make this situation go away somehow? No, Mom. I cannot make federal felony charges disappear through personal intervention. Jessica committed credit card fraud across multiple state lines, stealing from a federal law enforcement officer. She's potentially facing up to 20 years in federal prison. Mom began crying audibly. But she didn't know. She didn't know what your job was. She knew she was stealing from me. She knew she was committing fraud. My specific employment doesn't make theft more or less illegal under federal statutes. But she's your sister. And I'm the federal agent she committed multiple felonies against. Thursday morning brought another call, this time from Dad at 7:42 a.m. The lawyer Jessica hired says she's in extremely serious legal trouble. Real serious. He says the federal prosecutor assigned to her case is pushing for maximum sentences on all charges. That assessment sounds accurate. You have to help her somehow. You have to talk to your colleagues, explain the family situation. I cannot and will not attempt to interfere with an ongoing federal investigation. But you work with these people. You know how the system operates. Dad, I am these people. I'm the primary investigating officer. I'm the victim of record. And I'm the federal agent who built the criminal case against Jessica. The words seemed to impact him like physical blows, each revelation hitting harder than the last. You're the one who did this to her? She did this to herself when she chose to steal $32,000 from me. She was planning to pay you back eventually. With what money? She doesn't possess $32,000. She was never going to provide restitution. She made a mistake. People make mistakes. Federal felonies aren't mistakes, Dad. They're conscious criminal choices with serious legal consequences. Friday evening brought the emergency family intervention. They assembled at my apartment like a tribunal. Mom, Dad, Uncle Mike, Aunt Linda, my younger cousin Trevor, who usually avoided family drama with religious devotion, and even my grandmother who'd driven 3 hours specifically for this confrontation. We need to have a serious conversation, Mom announced when I opened the door, her tone suggesting I was about to receive a lecture on moral obligations and family loyalty. I let them file into my small living room, prepared coffee for everyone who wanted it, and settled into my reading chair to wait for the inevitable arguments. You have to find a way to drop these charges, Dad began without preamble. Jessica made some poor decisions, but she doesn't deserve to spend decades in federal prison. I cannot drop federal charges. That authority doesn't exist within my jurisdiction. You're being vindictive and cruel, Uncle Mike accused with the righteousness of someone who'd never been robbed by a family member. You're using your government position to punish Jessica for being more successful than you. I'm enforcing federal law without regard to personal relationships. She's family. Mom pleaded with genuine desperation. You don't send family members to prison over money. You don't steal from family members either, I replied. And this isn't simply about money. It's about multiple federal felonies. So you're choosing your career over your own family? Aunt Linda asked with obvious disgust. I'm choosing legal justice over criminal behavior. The arguments continued for nearly 3 hours. They pleaded with increasing desperation, threatened social ostracism, attempted emotional manipulation, and delivered guilt trips with professional skill. They accused me of jealousy, vindictiveness, cold-hearted ambition, and betrayal of fundamental family values. They painted Jessica as the unfortunate victim of my petty revenge fantasies and bureaucratic power abuse. Not once during the entire confrontation did anyone acknowledge that Jessica had committed serious crimes against me. Not once did anyone suggest that Jessica bore primary responsibility for her own criminal actions. Not once did anyone express concern for how I felt about being robbed by my own sister. The local news stations are calling about interviews, Trevor said quietly. He was the only family member who hadn't actively attacked my character. They want to do a story about the federal agent who prosecuted her own sister. Everyone stared at me with accusation and horror in their eyes, as if I'd somehow orchestrated media attention for personal aggrandizement. This publicity is going to destroy our family's reputation in the community, Mom said with obvious anguish. People will think we're a family of criminals. Jessica is a criminal, I said. She committed multiple federal felonies that are documented with overwhelming evidence. Because of your vindictive prosecution. Dad exploded with rage. If you hadn't pressed charges, none of this nightmare would be happening. If Jessica hadn't stolen from me, none of this would have been necessary. The trial was scheduled for 3.5 months later. Jessica's defense attorney, a competent criminal lawyer named Robert Kim, attempted every possible legal strategy. He argued that Jessica had believed she possessed implied permission to use the cards. He suggested that family financial disputes shouldn't involve federal law enforcement. He claimed that I was abusing my official position for personal vengeance. He portrayed Jessica as the victim of an overzealous prosecutor who couldn't separate professional duties from family grievances. None of these arguments could overcome the physical evidence. Credit card transaction records showing unauthorized use across multiple states. Surveillance footage from Las Vegas casinos and retail establishments clearly showing Jessica making purchases with my stolen cards. Witness testimony from the family dinner where Jessica had openly admitted to the theft and refused to provide restitution. Her own receipts, which she'd preserved as souvenirs of her criminal spree. The federal prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chin, presented a methodical case that painted a clear picture of premeditated fraud committed against a federal law enforcement officer. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Chin told the 12 citizens during her opening statement, the defendant didn't simply steal credit cards from a victim she perceived as powerless. She stole them from someone whose professional responsibility is investigating exactly these types of financial crimes. She was so confident that her victim couldn't or wouldn't seek justice, so certain that family relationships would protect her from legal consequences, that she kept the receipts as trophies. She bragged about her crimes to multiple witnesses. She showed complete contempt for federal banking laws and the authority of federal law enforcement. Jessica's defense attorney tried to portray me as the real villain in this situation. The cold, calculating sister who destroyed her own family for the sake of career advancement. Agent Thompson had options, defense attorney Kim argued during his opening statement. She could have resolved this as a private family matter. She could have arranged a payment plan, sought family counseling, pursued civil remedies. Instead, she chose to unleash the full power of federal law enforcement against her own sister. She chose her badge over her blood, her career over her family. When I took the witness stand, Kim attempted to undermine my credibility with questions about proportionality, family loyalty, and abuse of governmental authority. Agent Thompson, don't you believe that 20 years in federal prison represents grossly excessive punishment for what your sister viewed as borrowing money from family? Mr. Kim, federal sentencing guidelines exist to ensure consistent application of justice regardless of personal relationships. Credit card fraud is a serious federal crime whether it's committed by strangers or family members. But surely you could have resolved this situation through private negotiation? A structured payment plan, perhaps. The defendant stole $32,000, showed no remorse for her actions, possessed no means to provide restitution, and expressed no intention of attempting repayment. Private resolution was not a realistic possibility. Did you consider the devastating impact that prosecuting your sister might have on your family relationships? I looked directly at Jessica, who was sitting at the defense table with tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, she appeared genuinely frightened rather than angry or defiant. Mr. Kim, my family relationships were already devastated. They were destroyed the moment my sister decided that stealing from me was acceptable behavior because she perceived me as weak and powerless. They were further damaged when the rest of my family chose to celebrate her criminal actions instead of supporting me as the victim of those crimes. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes before returning unanimous guilty verdicts on all counts: credit card fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft from a federal employee, and interstate transportation of stolen financial instruments. Jessica received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. The presiding judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, explained her reasoning with crystalline clarity. Ms. Thompson, your crimes were not committed from desperation, financial necessity, or mental incapacitation. They were committed from pure greed and arrogant assumption of immunity from consequences. You stole from your own sister, someone who had trusted you with access to her home and personal belongings. You showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and no intention of providing restitution. Most significantly, you committed these federal crimes against a law enforcement officer, demonstrating complete disregard for federal authority and the rule of law. This sentence reflects both the seriousness of your criminal choices and the need to deter others who might believe family relationships exempt them from legal accountability. The family's reaction was entirely predictable. At Jessica's sentencing hearing, Mom stood up and screamed at me across the federal courtroom. "She was your sister. How could you destroy your own sister like this?" I wanted to scream back, "How could she rob her own sister?" But I maintained the professional composure that had served me throughout my career in federal law enforcement. After the sentencing concluded, I returned to my apartment and poured myself a generous glass of wine. My phone had been ringing constantly throughout the day, reporters seeking quotes, family members delivering ultimatums, co-workers offering support or asking procedural questions. I ignored every call and sat quietly in my living room, reflecting on the previous 8 months of legal proceedings. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied by the outcome. I felt tired, sad, and emotionally drained. I'd lost my family connections, but I'd preserved my integrity and professional ethics. I'd enforced federal law without favoritism, but at enormous personal cost. My supervisor called that evening at 9:47 p.m. "How are you holding up after today, Thompson?" "I'm managing adequately, sir." "No, you're not managing adequately. Nobody could handle this situation without significant emotional impact. I'm ordering you to take accumulated vacation time. That's not a request. I'd prefer to maintain my normal work schedule. I know you would prefer that, which is exactly why I'm making this mandatory. Take 3 weeks minimum. Go somewhere restful. Let the media attention dissipate. That's a direct order." I took 3 weeks and drove alone to the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. No internet connectivity, no cellular service, just hiking trails and clear mountain air that helped clear my head. When I returned to Washington, the news cycle had moved on to other stories and controversies. Jessica served 5.5 years of her 8-year sentence before being released to a federal halfway house. She never contacted me during her incarceration, never apologized for her actions, never acknowledged that her criminal choices had consequences beyond my vindictive prosecution. The extended family occasionally attempted to guilt me into visiting Jessica in prison or contributing money to her commissary account. I declined all such requests without explanation. 4 years after the trial concluded, I was promoted to Assistant Director of FinCEN's Criminal Investigation Division. The case that had destroyed my family relationships had simultaneously established my reputation as an investigator who couldn't be intimidated, corrupted, or compromised by personal relationships. I never married, never had children of my own, never rebuilt the family connections I'd lost. But I constructed something else. A distinguished career devoted to protecting innocent people from exactly the types of financial crimes that had been committed against me. Sometimes, late at night in my government office reviewing complex case files, I wonder if I made the optimal choice. If there was some middle ground I failed to consider, some alternative approach that could have held Jessica accountable without destroying every family relationship I'd ever known. But then I remember her standing in that living room, laughing while waving those receipts like victory banners, asking what a broke loser, like me, could possibly do about her theft. I remember my family cheering her criminal behavior, celebrating her boldness, dismissing my victimization as irrelevant drama. I remember the moment I realized that the people who were supposed to love and protect me had chosen instead to enable and celebrate the person who'd hurt me most. That's when I know with absolute certainty that I made the correct choice. Not the easy choice that would have preserved family harmony, not the choice that avoided conflict and maintained comfortable illusions, but the morally and legally correct choice. The choice that demonstrated federal law applies equally to everyone, regardless of blood relationships or family dynamics. The choice that established criminal behavior has serious consequences, even when committed by people we love. The choice that affirmed I was worth protecting, even if I had to protect myself from my own family. Jessica learned that family relationships don't provide immunity from federal prosecution. I learned that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything you thought mattered most. But it's still the right thing, and I would make the same choice again without hesitation.